resume the recording.
Great.
And hit the button. Okay. All right, we are all set.
Great.
So good morning. I'll do a quick introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'm Beth Rattay, the Artistic Director of the Boston New Music Initiative. Thanks for being here for our interview with Evan Williams, who's a composer as well as a conductor. He lives in the Boston area, and he's going to tell us, we performed one of his works a couple seasons ago for solo clarinet. And yeah, we're really excited to talk to him, and he's going to share about some stuff about some different pieces of his and his music.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's a really great pleasure to be here. So my presentation today is called Strange Bedfellows, the linking seemingly disparate musical elements in my music. Throughout my life, I've been really interested in a wide variety of musical genres and subjects, and it's inspired me to create music that has inspirations as disparate, I should say, from medieval chants to operas about cults, to music inspired by Star Trek. And as I progressed in my compositional training, I always thought that I should narrow down my interest and sort of focus on a couple things and get really good at those things and create sort of a cohesive aesthetic to my music. But in recent years, I actually found that diversity, that range of elements is actually sort of my strength. And I've been investigating ways to bring that out in my music in various ways. And so this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of these disparate elements that you can find throughout my music. First, we'll talk about the Renaissance, Baroque, jazz, and gospel influences in my harpsichord concerto Dead White Man music. And then we'll spend some time talking about acoustic analysis and rock music in my piece Grime. And then some time talking about the influence of improvisation, deep listening, and even science fiction in my piece Teach Yourself to Fly from This Pale Blue Dot. And then lastly, we'll end with some influence from computer programming in my piece If Else for flute and electronics. Dead White Man music was originally born out of my frustration that as an undergrad in college, my education did not include any music by composers of color. This includes music history, music theory, playing in ensembles and singing in ensembles. I was very involved. I played in the wind ensemble, the symphonic band, the orchestra. I sang in the chorus, I sang in the opera. And in all that time, I was not exposed to any music by African-American composers. And I believe in all that time, I played one piece by a female composer, that was Libby Larsen. Other than that, it was mostly all dead white men. And so that's what this piece is about, that struggle between who should be my influences? Is this music for me, or is it for someone else that doesn't look like me? And if so, do I continue? So this piece grapples back and forth between the canon and other influences like jazz and pop and gospel. I'm going to mainly focus on the toccata today, which is the third movement of this piece. A toccata, you may well know, is usually a piece for solo keyboard instrument that is supposed to display the virtuosity of the player. And while that is present in this piece, it's actually also about the virtuosity of all the instrumentalists in the ensemble. In this section of the music that I'll play at the end of the third movement, just about everyone comes forth as a soloist, and how they do this is through a set of variations called the folia. If I had a piano with me, I would go ahead and play you this chord progression, but this is a very well-used chord progression through the Baroque period that composers would write a set of variations over. And so it's not a theme that you write variations over. It's more like a chaconne, like Bach would use a set of chord progressions to continue to write a more complex counterpoint over. And so here is a bit of that section. And again, tell me if you don't hear it. That last section was a section of what we often call heterophony. And what happens in heterophony is that sort of every person of the ensemble is invited to be a soloist. And this is not really all that common in classical music, especially before the 20th century. You do get a few examples of it in early music, but it's actually very common in styles like gospel, spiritual, and traditional African music. Here is actually a really cool example of it. This is the funeral procession of Dolores Marsalis, the matriarch of the Marsalis family, and you can hear them in a couple of sections throughout the march playing various spirituals, and everyone sort of acts as a soloist throughout. not sure. Here we go. I think that's just like a beautiful celebration of life. It's of course, I'm sure there's sadness, but there's also a celebration for who that person was and what they did. And this is actually in my piece, that ending is the second time that I use a texture like that. The first time I used it is actually quite similar to this example, and inspired by another jazz great, and that would be Branford Marsalis, the brother of Terrence and the son of Dolores. And I went to a concert that he gave when I was an undergrad, and it was a really cool concert. And he was basically playing most of the tunes off of his CD Bragtown, and one of the tunes is Henry Purcell's "Oh Solitude." And he was talking about how he decided they were going to do this in the concert. He was like, I just gave them the music and they thought I was crazy. I was like, no, we're going to read this down. And so they play this, late Renaissance piece, and then they, perform improv over the changes of the chord, of the lament chord progression. And so I was really inspired by that. And so I took one of my favorite late Renaissance pieces, Flow My Tears by John Dowland, and did a similar thing. Now, again, this is sort of in the middle of this movement, so you won't hear too much of the John Dowland tune. Feel free to look up this performance afterwards. But here is the section of Heterophony, and you might recognize inspiration by another jazz great in it. So that bass line you probably recognize from Nina Simone's rendition of Feeling Good. Love Nina Simone, and definitely love, that's my favorite of hers, Feeling Good. And so this new sort of convergence of ideas, late Renaissance, Nina Simone, John Dowland. This is sort of something I've been exploring lately in my music. The first time I sort of embrace these influences was my piece Grime. Now, before this, for a long time, I was raised on rock music and gospel music, and definitely loved hip hop and all that kind of stuff. But when I was in college and starting grad school, I was like, well, I'm a serious classical composer, so that means I can't really be involved in that kind of music anymore. I have to only think about really heady, technical and and very, whatever kind of music. And I finally realized that no, that's not true. I can do whatever I want on my music. And the composers that I really started to fall in love with around that time, including Julia Wolf and David Lang, they also, had a lot of pop influences in their work. This piece was actually really important to my career for a lot of reasons. So it's also around the time where I started studying electronic music and acoustics, and I decided to bring that influence into the work. Now, the piece is completely acoustic. There is no electronic elements of it, but the way it was created is highly influenced by my study in electronic music, which I'll talk about in a bit. It also, like I said, embraces rock through using the sound of an electric guitar to be mapped onto this quartet of strings. Now, it's not technically a string quartet. It is for violin, viola, cello, and bass. And so you get one of each string instrument instead of the two violins, viola, and cello. It's also inspired by someone who became one of my favorite composers around the year 2013 when I wrote this piece, and that's Giacinto Scelsi, a really interesting composer who started to experiment with music that only used maybe one or a couple of notes in it, but through there he used a lot of interesting timbral variations in order to make this cool sound world out of just one note. One of my favorite pieces of his is the 4 pieces for orchestra on a single note, and it's just incredible to hear a minute or 4 minutes or so of just B flat, but the really great world he creates there. And career wise, this was the first work to sort of gain me some national attention as a composer. It was premiered at the finale of Make Music Chicago at a big crowd in St. James Cathedral in Chicago. That broadcast, that concert was broadcast on WFMT, my hometown classical music station, and then it later got featured on the website I Care If You Listen, which that presence on the mixtape actually led to my first commission, which was by Urban Playground Chamber Orchestra. They commissioned a piece for me, and then a couple of years later, they commissioned Dead White Man music from me. So it's led to a lot of great things in my musical career. Formally, the piece is a palindrome, and it starts on one pitch G, and then it expands, and then it contracts back to G, and then there's sort of a coda in G minor. Now, at the height of the expansion, I mentioned the sound of an electric guitar. That's what we get. So I found at the time I didn't play electric guitar. I still don't play electric guitar, but I own one now, and I sort of know the science of it, but I'm not a great player. So I found the sound of an electric guitar online. I thought it was really cool. It's going through some heavy distortion and reverb. And I basically mapped out this sound onto the string quartet. So how that works is, I'm going to get a little technical, but I hope it's worth it. So you may or may not be familiar with the overtone series. Now, this series is present in any note we hear. So if I went and played you a C4 on the piano, you wouldn't just hear that C4 quietly, very above that sound. You'd hear an octave, and then a perfect fifth, and then a perfect fourth, and then the major third and minor third, and then a major second and minor second. And this whole series defines the timbre of the sound, along with what we call the amplitude envelope. How does the sound grow and decay over time? And so like a violin has a slow growth and decays long, but then something like a hand clap or percussion instrument has a quick attack and then a very quick release. And so those things together help us tell the difference between instruments. It's also how we can create new instrumental sounds through electronics. And so that was very important to my interest when I was writing this piece. And so I took this this electric guitar sound, and I put it through a program that's called Klingbeil Spear, and it analyzes all of the individual sine waves that the sound is comprised of. And so you can actually take even the sound of my voice and put it through this machine, and it'll show you all the sine waves that are present in my voice. And in this diagram, you can see the darker the sound, the more present it is. And so this is a guitar playing the pitch F sharp 3, and then above it we have the octave that we should hear. Now then we should hear a C sharp 5 to be the perfect fifth, but we don't. We get a D5, and then we do get the correct F sharp 5 that we want to hear above it. And then we get another pitch that we don't expect to hear, this B5. And so this is why this sound has its very unique timbre, because it doesn't conform exactly to the prescribed harmonic series. So here is a sample of the original sound. And then what I did is I asked my friends who played violin, violoncello, bass to play these notes with different techniques. And I put it in a mock-up in order to create this effect. And now here's the mock-up. And now here is that section in the final work. Some very technical things, but that comes out to have a really cool result. And I sort of think that sort of really characterizes my personality. I really like really nerdy things, but I also like things that are like kind of have a bit of coolness to it, however you want to describe whatever cool means. But it sort of really really kind of drawn to those things, which also talks about, is a good segue into the next work I'm going to talk to you about, which is called Teach Yourself to Fly from This Pale Blue Dot. It has multiple influences. The first is, and most important, is Pauline Oliveros, the late Pauline Oliveros, great composer and the creator of the philosophy that we call deep listening. And deep listening, for those who don't know, asks the performer and the audience to go beyond just hearing a sound and to engage with sound through deep listening as a spiritual exercise. And that listening can be of nature, of others, but also of yourself. And the chief influence of this work, and I should say, the reason why I wrote this piece is I was commissioned by the Response Project. Every year they do a series of commissions that are a response to a certain piece by a certain composer. And so this year it was Pauline Oliveros and her sound meditations. So the first half of the piece is named after her sound meditation, Teach Yourself to Fly. But the real sort of influence of my piece was her work for chorus, Wind Horse. And you can actually see the score here. And so this is a mandala, and at the center of the mandala is listen. And you can go out one step, but you always are supposed to return to listen, and then you go out and then you return to listen. And that's one of the things that I do in this piece. The pianist and the percussionist listen to each other and they respond to each other, but they also respond to randomized audio recordings. These recordings come from the Voyager probe. And aboard the Voyager probe is the golden record. And so that's the second half of this title, Pale Blue Dot. You might be familiar with Carl Sagan and his work on this Voyager probe, the golden record, and then his book, Pale Blue Dot. And by Pale Blue Dot, of course, he's referring to Earth, because once the probes were launched, it took a picture back of Earth, and this little blue dot in the middle of this black sea of space was the little planet that we call home. And recently, so these were launched in the 70s, I believe. 1977 is the year that they were launched. But only recently, I believe in either 2016 or 2017, they both became the first human-made objects to leave our solar system. And so now they are the furthest thing from our planets that we have created. And the idea behind the golden record is it was supposed to be an introduction to any intelligent life that might be out in the universe. And it has a lot of greetings, music, and sounds of nature of our planet, and sort of to say like, hi aliens, this is us, this is some information about us. Whether or not you believe in intelligent life outside of Earth, that's up to you. I also think that another part of this project is sort of a time capsule. So it's our hope, at least many of us, that one day that we will be spacefaring, and that one day we will catch up to the probes, and we will remember life as it was in the 20th century. And so I imagine that the probes are now, out there. They are still functioning and they are still sending telemetry back to Earth, but eventually they'll be too far that we won't be able to hear them anymore. And so once that happens, I imagine that the probes will then have to teach themselves how to fly and how to keep going and how to survive. And I kind of imagine that the recordings above on the golden record is how they go back and forth communicating with each other. They split it up and distort it, and that's how they're sort of talking to each other, how they're reaching out to any life that might be ahead of them, and how they're trying to reach back to us. Secretly, I kind of see this piece as a fan fiction prequel to Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, thanks to my late father, who got me into it. And if you know that film, the Earth and the solar system are being threatened by this entity called V'ger that's just destroying everything in its path. And they realize that V'ger is actually a Voyager probe. Now, I think it's supposed to be like Voyager 6. They were very enthusiastic about the Voyager program at the time. They thought we were going to send 6 of them out there, which we never did. We only sent the first 2. And so this probe is found by an intelligent species, and it's sort of upgraded into this death machine, and it's trying to come back home, trying to come back to its creators to figure out why does it exist. And so that's the whole movie. And so I kind of see this piece as that exploration of them going out and into the universe. So throughout this work, I use a lot of improv, and the players are given some instructions to how to respond to each other and how to respond to these recordings. Again, the recordings are randomized, and so there are maybe say 30 recordings that are possible to be played in this piece. You will not hear them all, and in fact, it's completely possible that some of them will never be heard in all of its performances. Some of the work that I did, splicing it up and editing it, will never be heard, but that's okay, because that's sort of a part of the accepting this as an exercise, as the computer sort of has some choice on how and when it will respond, and then the players have a choice of how they will respond to the computer. So here is a portion of the piece. So the last piece I'll talk about today is called If Else. And it's sort of continuing the idea about computers and what agency, if any, they have. Before my father passed away a couple years ago, he was a computer programmer, and he actually often encouraged me to take it up and to study it. He said, you'll probably have to do this one day, and I just like really never took to it. I thought it was really boring and it was too technical, and I was just like, I'm a musician, I'm not ever going to need these skills. But as I continued my exploration of electronic music, I started to like engage with programming. I even took a course at my doctorate at CCM that was called Computer Programming Projects. And one day I came home for I forgot what break it was. It must have been Thanksgiving break, probably. And I was working on my final project for this course. It was actually an iPad app, and I was just having the hardest time. And so I asked my dad, I was like, Daddy, can you help me figure out what I'm doing wrong in this coding? And he was just like, see, I told you. And he never let it go. Which he was fully within his rights to let me know that he was right. He was always right. And so but as this weird creative mind that prefers to read poetry and literature and plays rather than technical programming, I started to see sort of a very poetic nature behind this programming language, especially in what is called Boolean conditional statements. And so the if then else statement is an example of this conditional logic, where it says, if this happens, then do Y. If something else happens, then do Z. And I actually thought that was a very interesting way to think about like programming. There's like this really simple statement that can actually perform very complex calculations and run really big programs. Is basically based on this simple idea. And it makes you wonder, do computers have the power to choose, or what is choice? Is for choice for humans, is it just here are the conditions and your programming will say if this happens, then this is what you will do, if else you will do this. So I thought it was a very interesting way to think about music. And so throughout this piece, I project this idea in the music. So in the first movement, if else, and I will play that movement and then I'll stop and I'll talk about each movement as we listen. If the flutist plays a pitch that is D5 or higher, the computer will respond with some kind of processing. Now that'll either be granulation. So what that is taking the sound of the flute and chopping it up into little bits, or it will do pitch shifting. It'll take the pitch and like shift it up an octave or two, or it will respond with this plucked string sound. And this again is random. And so I have no control over which of the choices it'll choose. If it hears the pitch, then it'll choose one of them. So every time you hear this piece, it's going to sound a little bit different, which is something that interests me in the work. And I don't know why, but for some reason I have not pulled up this video. So let me quickly find it. There it is. And I think we'll do this performance by Brittany. It's one of my favorites. The next movement is called switch. And so basically a switch statement switches between two different operations. And how this works is that the flute and the computer are switching roles between who is a soloist and who is an accompanist. And so at first the flutist plays a melody that the computer accompanies, but then every time the flute plays some high pitches, that's the trigger to switch roles. And the computer responds through sort of a computerized mock or repeat of what the flutist just did. And so it's the same musical material, but it's like the computer trying to emulate the flutist. So a while statement basically tells the computer to keep repeating a loop until a certain condition is met. I have a slightly different interpretation of this. And so what happens is that while the other movements had some sort of element that would play before the flute made any noise, only if the flute makes noise will the computer process the sound. So there is no sound that the computer makes on its own. It's all directly influenced by what the flute is doing. It takes input from the flute and then a response to it. The next movement is called break. And basically a break statement will signal for a program to end a loop if a certain condition is met. And so in this movement, what I do is I build up big masses of sound, and then to sort of these loud breaking points, and then I just break them, and it stops and sort of creates this big crash, and then I start building again until it comes to another breaking point. This last movement is less concerned about the programming language, but more of just a musical sort of palindrome to end the piece. It actually has the same musical material as the beginning, but in reverse order. Or similar musical material, I should say. Since we do want to leave time for questions, I'm going to just quickly talk about these last two things. Just some other works that are inspired by these various ideas. Amber Waves is a piece that I play on trombone. It's for electronics, and it uses these loops, and it's in waves of sound. It's inspired by me growing up next to an actual wheat field in the suburbs of Chicago. And then another piece that's sort of Chicago based, Four Places on Lake Michigan. It uses field recordings and hymns and works by Schubert to sort of create these interesting homages to these places where I spent time. I talked a little bit about my interest in cults. I have an opera called Jonestown, and it uses, if you're not familiar with this cult and this event. They were originally from San Francisco, and they moved in the 70s to Guyana, South America, to sort of escape the trouble that they were in with the government. And they eventually ended up having a mass sort of murder-suicide when they were discovered by the authorities. And then I did mention this piece a little bit earlier, Beautiful Death. It was commissioned by Urban Chamber Playground Orchestra, my first paid commission. And it is inspired by the Dido's Lament from Dido and Aeneas, but also by this very famous photograph in Time magazine of a woman, Evelyn McHale, who jumped off of the Empire State Building. And also it has some influence by Kanye West. The title of the piece actually comes from his song, Power. Some pieces in progress. I'm currently working on a mass for the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. It will feature Boston's own Reginald Mobley, recently featured in the coronation of King Charles III. And I'm also will start a concerto for flute and saxophone. And actually, this is sort of, I'm very excited. This is at the, I forgot which museum it is. Sorry, someone can maybe tell me. Currently in Boston, there is a retrospective of Hokusai, the Japanese watercolor painter who created these very famous watercolors of these scenes of Japan, often with waves and mountains. And the first time when I saw waves actually out in New Hampshire, the first time I saw waves, the first time I saw mountain ranges, because I'm from the Midwest, where the Great Plains, there's no mountains in the Midwest. And I was like, wow, this actually reminds me of looking at the Lake Michigan or an ocean of all these waves, these mountains that kind of look like waves. And eventually I do want to write another opera, again, based on a cult. I'm not quite sure what my fascination with cults are, but I've sort of researched a lot about them in recent years. The Heaven's Gate cult, which is from the 90s, actually a very similar method of suicide as Jonestown, poisoned Kool-Aid. But they also had these very odd science fiction based beliefs. In fact, the brother of Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura in the original series, was a part of this cult and died during the event. So those are some pieces that I have in progress. The opera isn't in progress, but it's something I hope to write one day. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and I'll have any discussion.
Thanks so much, Evan. I feel like I have a question. Well, one thing, it's more of an observation, but like I listened to If Else with a different performance, like just this, and then listening to it again, like with a totally different performer, I'm still like processing like how different it was. It was really amazing, and like now I want to hear it again, like by another person. And just
yeah, everyone who's played it has had their different take on it, and of course, since the electronics are slightly different every time, it sounds like a new experience almost every time you hear it.
Yeah, so that's really cool. I really enjoyed that. What else? I also really appreciated like this comment on diversity. I relate with that, like as my own posing. Like I'm just interested in so many things, and sometimes I felt in academia like, oh, pressure, the same thing, the pressure to like really focus on one thing.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear a story, you know, of someone that is being diverse and reveling in it, I'll say.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I decided that I was going to go into academia during college and grad school, I no one actually ever really said it to me. A couple of people said it to me in various ways, but they're like, oh, you're gonna have to focus, you're gonna have to decide, what you're going to do. And like there's this idea of like finding your niche, and once you get that niche, that's your market, and that's how you sell yourself as a person, as a composer. And at the time I'm like, I really love electronic music, I really love conducting, I really love composition. And at the time I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to choose two of these. One of these is gonna have to go. But my first tenure track job was teaching electronic music, teaching composition, and conducting the orchestra. And so literally like those three things in my life that I I had to do all of them as a composer. Now that's another kind of problem with academia, is that like now they want people who can do everything and pay fewer people less money to do those things, but that's a rant for another day.
Yeah. What was my I'm trying to remember. I was like, if anybody else has questions, feel free to jump in. Well, there was another piece that I wanted to ask you about.
Evan, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about your music and diving a little bit deeper into it. So in part of your presentation, you talked about your interest in in rock and electric guitar, using some of those sounds in the works. Do you have any other pieces that that sort of highlight some of these similar timbres, or that any plans for composing for electric guitar specifically in the future?
So it's funny, like I have a couple of pieces that like I'm emulating the sound of electric guitar. Like I have another piece, I actually decided to withdraw it because it didn't really work. It's called Jimmy. It was for viola in live electronics, and it was inspired by Jimi Hendrix's rendition of the national anthem at Woodstock. I kind of felt it just didn't work. It didn't really do what I wanted it to do, so I don't let it be performed anymore. But eventually then I started actually writing for electric guitar. I'm like, I guess like I should stop emulating the sound and just use one of them. And so I have a couple pieces with electric guitar. One is called Heavy, and then the other is a big long piece. Very few people have heard it yet. We're trying to get it released on an album. It's called Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. Of course, obvious reference to William Blake. It's for a singer, and not a classical singer, actually sort of a vocalist who mostly does pop music, but she actually was trained as an opera singer too. And then Perot ensemble, so flute, clarinet, violin, cello, bass, drum set, and then electric guitar. So it's a big, like sort of 40-50 minute long piece that hopefully will be picked up soon by a label.
That sounds wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I listened to Heavy. that was the one that I was thinking of. That was really cool. I listened to that one this morning. I loved as you said in your music, like the diverse threads, and like, oh, this sounds kind of like jazz, and then this like this, and it just wove them together in a way that I found very fresh and fun.
Oh, thanks.
So, all right. Any other questions or comments? I don't think so. All right.
Yeah,
well,
I guess I'll just say that like once I finally sort of like realized that like no, I can't be who like sort of my teachers, who I thought I wanted my teachers to be, or can't be like, can't like just do what all the other sort of composers were doing. It's sort of like that's when I discovered myself, and it's something that I've been trying to bring into my own life. Just like, a lot of us, perhaps when we were growing up, we felt a need to conform to a certain thing, and just like as you get older, you realize, no, I do what I want, and but also like in my teaching, it's like when I teach my composition students, I've had students that are really think like they have to do a certain thing, they have to compose a certain way because this is the style, and I just tell them, no, you do whatever you want, and like people will actually start caring about you more when you portray your unique voice, your unique self, even if that does have these like crazy weird things like medieval music and Star Trek.
Definitely. And I'm thankful that especially the new music world is becoming more and more like open to like all these different sounds and all different ideas and ways to put stuff together. It's kind of cool. And also, like the just music in general now, like is even like blurring all kinds of lines all the time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
So all right. Well, thank you so much, Evan. It was a pleasure to talk with you. And we wish you the best.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. And then done.